This is the first portrait that I've ever done, and I'm actually pretty happy with how it turned out. Now, I could have thrown this painting out about 3 different times, but I didn't. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how I painted this and how I ended up fixing those issues. I hope you enjoy it, and let's get right into it. Okay, so I'm starting with the background first on this, and I liked that there were some trees and different things going on in the background. You can see part of the sky, but she also had this big white fence behind her, and I didn't like how the white fence kind of competed with the white of her sweater or jacket, whatever she's wearing. So I decided to just get rid of that completely in the background, and I focused on the sky and getting some greens and some browns in, so it looks like she's either sitting in some tall grass or maybe there's some trees coming behind her, and I'm doing this all wet and wet. So for this, I'm using my phthalo blue for the sky background, and I'm doing a very light watery mix of it, and then I'm coming in with my sap green and starting to get in some of that texture, and I'm trying to be pretty loose with this too, so you'll see I'm dabbing it on the paper, and this paper worked really well with this wet and wet background. I pretty much started it completely wet, and I took the whole background until it was almost dry, and it was still letting me put paint on it. So you can see here I'm coming in and kind of making some sticks or trees in the background, and then I take a clean brush and I get it wet in water, dab it off on a clean paper towel, and then I come and soften some of those edges to push those trees even further into the background. Now for this painting, the background was not my focus, so I'm just trying to get something in and have it pretty loose and light so that the girl in the foreground stands out. Now another thing I ended up changing in this painting was the cup. So I think there was a snowman, but again it was a white cup and I thought it was competing with too much, so I changed it to a red cup. Because I was using a lot of green in the background, I thought just a plain red cup would be nice and kind of complement that. And I also thought that would complement her cheeks because I loved the rosiness of her cheeks. They were very bright pink, so I was hoping all of this would work together. Now I'm coming in and starting to work on her hair, and this is where the first disaster happened. Now, I am not a portrait artist by any means, but I am trying to break out of my comfort zone and try new things, and this was definitely a learning curve for me. So usually I like to paint a lot of wet and wet. So that's what I was trying to do for this hair. So I laid down some water, I started putting in my highlights, I started putting in my shadows, and then boy, things got muddy awfully fast because I just couldn't start controlling where the colors were going after a while, and it just ended up getting a little dark too fast. So you'll see me start lifting some color out, and then I completely give up on this side, and I will actually go in and scrub all of this out and do it again. But I wanted to leave this in as a learning curve because I really learned that that's not how I like to do hair. Now I have all of this in real time over on my Patreon, so you see me struggling in real time, and then I say, you know what, let's just scrub this out, start over, we'll start on the other side of the hair, and I do that in a minute. And I try a different technique and it came out so much better. Now here I'm going in on dry paper and I'm using a little bit drier paints. So I'm still using yellow ochre and a little bit of red because the red would cast from the cup onto her hair. So I'm getting that in, and then I'm starting to get some of my mid-tones in, and I'm starting to build up the depth in her hair a little bit slower here. And I feel like this side came out so much better. And then I go back over to the other side and I end up fixing that as well. Now, once we start on her face and we end up doing one of the eyes, I completely get rid of one of those two and start over. So really, even when things go wrong in your paintings, don't worry too much about it. You can pretty much almost fix anything unless there's like a hole in your paper, and even then, I'm sure I could try to figure something out. But really, when you're painting, you know, don't panic too much if things aren't going the way you want. Just walk away for a little bit, come back with some fresh eyes, and then you'll be able to see a little bit better how you need to fix the problem. So you can see I'm coming back in with those dark areas. Because the base layer that I already had on the hair was pretty close to the highlights that I had on the other side, I just left those there, and I'm just starting to work some dark colors in around them. And again, I'm working dry, like wet paint on dry paper at this point, which let me control it a lot better, and I like the result a lot better. Now, I did find that the right side of the hair was looking a little bit too detailed compared to the left, so I just went in with some clean water and just tried to blend a little bit of that detail out so that it would look a little bit more like the left side. And I'm actually pretty happy with how the hair came out. For somebody that doesn't do portraits or hair, well, this is the first portrait and hair that I've ever done. I'm actually pretty happy with the results so far. So now I'm going in and working on her face, and I'm just using 3 colors here. So I use yellow ochre because I used a lot of that in the hair. I use my Winsor red and I use my phthalo blue. Now, even though phthalo blue is a staining color, it worked really great in this portrait. So I end up going in with the yellow ochre and the red first, and I get like a peachy color in. And then I end up mixing a little bit of the phthalo blue into that to kind of dull it down a little bit and get more of like a purpley, darker shadow. And I think because the phthalo blue was a little bit staining, this worked well because I was able to get those shadows in. And then I went over top with another layer to kind of brighten up some areas, but those shadow areas stayed in place. Now I'm still doing most everything wet on wet, so I went ahead and wet the entire face, and the first layer I went over the teeth and everything. Because the teeth aren't completely white, I did go over with the lightest layer, and then every other layer after that I did go ahead and avoid the teeth, but you can see I'm putting in some of those darker shadows now. And what I'm doing is I'm putting them in with one brush, and then I take a damp brush and kind of soften out those edges. Now, I could notice putting in some of these shadow colors, I was losing that vibrancy in the face, especially on her nose. You can see it's getting quite dark, but you still need those dark shadows in a portrait for it to look realistic. So now I'm just coming back in and I'm adding some more warmth to the face and kind of warming everything up. And I really like how those shadow areas still shine through, even though I'm putting some darker warm colors on top. And again, I'm really trying to keep those cheeks nice and rosy because that is one of the things that stood out the most to me with this portrait, and I really wanted to keep that part of this picture. And I'm starting to go in and define her lips a little bit. So for this, I'm just using my Winsor red and a little bit of, I think, my phthalo blue and maybe a touch of neutral tint just in the darkest areas. Now again, I kind of mess up her teeth at one point because I get some of that dark color over top of them. But I say we're just going to leave it and we'll come back and scrub that area up when it's dry and fix it later. Now, this is another area where I messed up in the painting. So that left eye there is not looking so hot. So you can see I just take my scrubber brush, completely scrub it out. I even end up scrubbing a little bit of the skin off. So I just take a little bit of that skin color, lay that back down, let it dry, and then I come right back over top with my darks afterwards, and you wouldn't even notice. So this was really a great picture for me to start with because I could pick the areas that I really wanted to focus on. One thing I really enjoyed was getting some of the darker areas in the face to really make her nose pop and her mouth pop and the cheeks pop. Like I really liked getting those areas dark enough and bright enough to get the form in the face. Now I'm going in and I'm going to start working on the hat and her mitts, and I used my cobalt teal and I mixed a little bit of the phthalo blue. So my cobalt teal is just a really light, bright blue. It is a little bit more opaque and I wanted to kind of tone it down a little bit. So I added the phthalo blue in there because I did add that in the background. But the reason I chose the cobalt teal was so it would stand out quite a bit from the background, and now you can see the hat against the sky area. It looks so much brighter. So this is just going to help my portrait pop forward a little bit more from the background, just because I'm using some brighter, punchier colors there, and that was my goal. And then I'm just getting some shadows in her mitts here, and this was another fun area just to play around with colors in the shadows and play around with a little bit of the red reflecting onto the gloves. Now I haven't forgot about that unpainted part in the mug. We do go back and paint that in, and I think I actually add an extra layer of my Winsor red over top of it just to make the mug stand out a little bit more. Now I'm taking watered down versions of all of the colors that I've used in the painting, and I'm starting to put them in her sweater. So underneath the hair there's some shadows. Where her elbow areas would be, I put some red shadows in. by the gloves, I put some blue shadows in. I also put a little bit of greens. Now they're not standing out a whole lot on the video here because they're quite light in color, but I did want some kind of color in her sweater because white objects still reflect all of the colors around them, so I did want to include some into her sweater or jacket. And I did the same thing with the white scarf that's around her face. So I put some red around where the cup is and a little bit of browns around her face and her hair because they would be reflecting on there as well. And then the last thing I do is take a little bit of my P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and I want to capture a little bit of detail in her scarf, some of those little like fluffy things coming off of them. So I just create a little bit of fluff coming off of her scarf, and I really think it just pulled this portrait together because I wanted most of the detail really around the hat, her face, the cup, the scarf, the mitts, the hair, and everything else can just be loose and, you know, a second thought in this painting. If you enjoyed this, then be sure to subscribe. Check out my Patreon for all of my real-time tutorials. And if you want to see another tutorial like this, then check out this video here. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.